Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Take Out the Stigma of Grief Week. We are kicking off today with our very first session called Good Grief, Rediscovering Hope After Losing a Spouse or Life Partner. And today I have two wonderful ladies with me, Robin Murphy and Heather Cruz. I'd like to welcome them both. Heather, can you just say hello and introduce yourself, and then Robin?
Good morning. So I am Heather Cruz. Ultimately, a little bit about me. I am a suicide widow. I am also a mom to an amazing 8-year-old daughter who you may have just seen hand me her school stuff. She's here on virtual school right now too. But we also share our lives with my boyfriend, his two teenagers, and a lot of pets, too many pets, but we love them. That being said, part of that is that I have been a licensed veterinary technician for over 15 years now. I am the author of The Widow Next Door, which is, it's about my journey as a young widow and a single mom, and after I lost my husband to suicide, and where I went from there. In all of that, I have become certified in grief recovery, and I'm also a certified life and leadership coach. So kind of have a lot going on.
Thank you, Heather. And I actually have a copy of Heather's book here. I ordered it off of Amazon once we confirmed, and it's a great book, Heather. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Robin, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Murphy. I'm a grief counselor with Delaware Hospice. I've been with Delaware Hospice for 10 years. I'm not a Delawarean. I'm actually from Michigan. I was active duty military and met my husband overseas, and we ended up retiring here at Dover Air Force Base. He retired. I did not. I got out to have babies. So we have 3 children, and all of them are adults, and we're empty nesters now. They're all kind of on their own, but looking forward to them coming home for Thanksgiving. So we do have one pet, not like Heather, just one little dog that I could use some guidance on. He's a tiger. He's only 20.
I know those well.
They're
my favorite.
Yeah, he's a multi-poo, and he has, I guess they call it the Napoleon syndrome.
Yeah.
He looks like a sweet little cotton ball until he sees another dog.
I've had multiple chihuahuas, so yeah, I know it well. We can chat.
Yeah, that's me. I love what I do with Delaware Hospice. It's a wonderful work, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much, Robin. I learned more about you today. This is good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Heather, I just pulled up a slide with some pictures and the cover of your book, and you had started to introduce yourself. Would you mind sharing with everyone a little bit more about your story and why you're here today?
So, I am also not a native Delawarean. I grew up in New Jersey and went to college in Massachusetts, moved back to New Jersey, and I met my wonderful husband working together. He was the IT guy in the company that I was working at. And it was a very quick, very new, we were meant to be. We were engaged in 3 months, married a year later. We decided to move to Delaware because my family was here and wanted to have children. So the first thing I will say is that my husband was a wonderful, intelligent man. He was unbelievable at computer programming. He was a wonderful photographer. He took that photo of me on the left, and my mom took that photo of us with his camera on the right. So we had a traditional young whirlwind romance, and struggled through a few years of infertility, and then we're finally blessed with my little girl. When she was 7 months old, we suddenly lost him on New Year's Eve to suicide, which someone that was married for almost 5 years, knowing him for 7 years, I was the most shocked person there was. There was nothing until that day that would have given me an indication that there was anything going on with him. I thought I knew this man inside and out, and ultimately I did. But when there is mental illness involved and I didn't really know what I was looking for, I missed the signs. And that's through no fault of my own or his. I didn't know what I didn't know. Since then, I've learned a lot. I've struggled a lot. I've picked up the pieces of my life and figured out how I'm going to move forward, how I'm going to still be the best mom I can. And I was 28 years old and trying to figure out how the love of my life was gone in an instant. And what do I do next? So I found personally that blogging was unbelievably helpful to me. It was a way to get as I say, the demons out of my head. It was a way for me to get out the pain and the angst and just be so real about everything I was feeling and everything I was doing and how I was making progress forward. So I started writing, as the extreme dark clouds started to move out. It was about a month later when I started to, find my footing and realize that, there's more than just surviving each day as little as doing what I can to just survive. And that was the beginning, was doing what I can to just survive and do what my child needed for me. And I always joke that while the animals needed to be cared for, we had a lot of pets, the baby needed to be cared for. So I did that. And slowly I started to see how this was really helpful to me. And then I started to have people that were rooting for me, people that I knew years ago, people that were a friend of a friend of a friend, people that I'd go to a party and people would whisper, "I read your blog." I'd be like, it's not a secret. Like, it's out there for everyone to read. I started to become in our circles as somebody that, if you're struggling, look, read what she's doing. Read how she is standing up and saying, I'm gonna survive this. And I'm not just going to survive this, I'm going to find my joy again. And how I said, I'm not gonna hide from what happened. I'm not going to whisper, it was suicide. I'm going to stand up and say, this seemingly happy, healthy, normal human being had demons that we never knew. That it's okay that if you have feelings like that you reach out to somebody, because I wish I did. I wish I knew, and I wish he had reached out. I was able to stand there and say, I'm going to make a difference from this. And that's what I've done for almost 8 years now. We're coming up on December again. And in December, it's going to be 8 years since I've lost him. And yes, life has gone on. I'm raising my daughter. I have, she is 8 years old and happy and healthy. And I'm surviving virtual school as a mom in these times. And I'm getting through every step, and I'm finding the joy in life. And yes, I have been in a new relationship for 5 years and built a new family, but that doesn't change. While this doesn't define me, this is me, and this is what I've been through. And I would like to take whatever I have been through and use it for good. And, I couldn't save him. I didn't know I could, but maybe I can save somebody else. So that's what I do now.
That is such an extraordinary story. And thank you, Heather, for sharing. It's so personal, and you just show such bravery and resilience. And look what you're teaching your daughter. It's absolutely incredible.
You never know what you can handle until you're in it and you can do it. And people used to say that to me in the beginning, you're so much stronger than I am. And I'm like, but I never would have thought that about I don't see it. I'm doing what I need to do to give my daughter the life she deserves and to honor my husband, and at the same time live a happy life still. This didn't have to completely destroy me. It sure feels like it at first, as anybody that, any kind of loss, not just a spouse, not just suicide, any kind of loss, it's dark in the beginning, but it's taking those steps toward the light.
Robin, would you like to comment from a bereavement counselor's point of view for us before we go into some of the other slides?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you, Heather, for sharing your story. I know that it's very intimate and so personal to you, but for you being vulnerable and just sharing that with your writing and, and the other avenues that you're doing your work in. It's really important because when people hear someone else's story, it helps them to know that they're not alone in their grief, which is significant, because loneliness is one of the things that I call the beast of grief. And when we think we're the only ones going through something, we can feel like we're all by ourselves. So the one thing that really struck me in your story too, Heather, was your resiliency. And that's a huge component in grief. I think a lot of people feel that they lose their self-esteem in grief. But when they start to realize that, I love the Winnie the Pooh quote, and I just had to look it up while Heather was talking, because I can't always remember it word for word. I don't want to slaughter it, but I love that it says, "You're braver than you believe, you're stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think." And it's so true when you're able to just express your own grief, when you're able to do the mourning process. You learn so much more about yourself, and those things that you think that you don't have can really come to light in those times of testing.
I love that quote.
I just wrote it down.
Yeah.
And something that I really it struck me too is the journaling. And I think that's something in my personal journey after my husband died suddenly, that was something that really helped. It was kind of like a place where I could put those emotions and they could stay. So it could like compartmentalize things. And, it reminds me of this quote. I don't know who came up with it. I know Robin Roberts speaks to it a lot, but it says, it reads, "Make your message." And you definitely have done that and helping so many people.
As much as maybe it's not for everyone, I still believe that it is a truly important part of healing, especially going through the seminars, the grief recovery ones, where, you get out the unspoken things. And I have done that with people that I know that unfortunately have become a part of the widow world.
Yeah.
I
club
will
you don't want to be in.
Yeah, like you don't want to welcome anybody to it. You don't want to be in it. But when you're there, at least you've got somebody that's been there for a while.
Yeah.
So I will often like pick out a really pretty journal and a nice pen and some stuff to go with it. And that's kind of this is my gift to somebody that's newer in the process. And I've had a lot of people tell me that while at first they were unsure, that it has totally been amazing for them to be able to start journaling. I just chose, and nobody has to do that, but personally, I chose to make mine public, very raw, very real, and then publish it,
Yeah, the intimacy of that, it's extraordinary.
Even now, like I'll read it and it's like, wow, this is me. I can feel where I was, and it's so far, you know what I mean? Like it's so far beyond where I'm at now that I'm like, wow, I can still like pick up this book and remember just exactly where I was in that moment and how far I've come now.
One thing that I would like to say about the journaling process is, a lot of people, like you were saying, it's not for me, but I encourage anyone that, maybe journaling isn't for you, but at least take the time at some point in your processing to write a letter to your loved one. It's not that you share with anybody necessarily, that's for you. But it's such a wonderful medium to be able to, not only are you thinking it, you're feeling it, you're seeing yourself write it, and you're seeing those words come to life on that paper. And
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a version of one of the letters I've written to my husband in the book, but there are some and I just go out there and I literally, I haven't in a long time, but when there were things that need to be said, I go out there and I read it to him for no one but him.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is such a challenging time, obviously, with the holidays approaching. I encourage people, especially if this is your first holiday season, maybe even picking out a very special card and writing your message in there, your letter in there, and sealing it up and putting it into safekeeping, knowing that you're sharing that deepest, rawest, painful part of you. It's going to hurt. that's part of the journey, but allowing
It is.
yourself to do that, there's a great release that happens.
You have to go through it. You can't get around it. And that was something that was really hard for me to accept, that, you know, there's no masking this. There's no hiding from this, because if I hide from it, it's just going to come back later. I had to do the work to get through the pain.
Yep. Grief takes work for sure.
It does.
That's a great segue into this next slide. We've touched on a couple points about, coping with the death of someone that you someone in your life, your loved one, your spouse. And, it's so important to take good care of yourself, self-care. I remember hearing those words and thinking, how do I do that? After you have to pick up the pieces and there's children and animals and, and you're trying to move on, but it is so important, to be patient, to give yourself that gift of time.
Mm-hmm.
One of our counselors had told me over and over again, feelings aren't right or wrong, they just are. And there's a range of emotions, anger, sadness, and it's okay to experience those. And to try to take care of yourself, whether it's sleeping, which can be very difficult, trying to exercise, maybe to get out in nature, try to ground yourself, and to eat. I think a lot of people even forget to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And something else I think, I know I heard a lot was, don't make any big changes right away.
I was told that constantly. Don't make any major life changes. Don't make any major life decisions.
Yeah.
And typically they say for about a year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I waited 3 years until I moved out of that house and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And I always encourage people, because that is one of the things that we say, but sometimes people do have to make those changes, whether it's financially motivated or it's just not feasible for them to stay where they're at, or they do have to make decisions. So I do encourage people with that, if they have to, just to try to get sound counsel from other people too, so they're not just making that decision on their own in the rawness of their emotions.
Somebody that can have a different perspective and want what's best for them.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you're in such a fog and it's hard to figure out.
I talk about sometimes how I feel that I almost missed the normalcy of motherhood in the beginning. There are parts of my daughter's life that I feel are missing in my head, because your brain, your mind is focused on surviving and getting through it. A lot of that outside stuff is not being focused on anymore. Now, that's not to say that my daughter wasn't well cared for and spoiled and raised properly. It just means that my focus was on making sure I was doing that, not necessarily creating the memories of it.
Right.
I really topic of the good self-care, and I forget who the author is on the extreme self-care, but she talks about having radical self-care. And I really think that's an important term to pull into our idea of taking good care of ourselves in grief. We really need to be radical about it, because most of the time we're not always thinking about ourselves, right? We're thinking about other people. We're thinking about how they perceive us in this, or how are they going to judge us through this journey. And it's really all about you at this point, getting through to where you're able to continue to do the next thing. And so when you talk about self-care, it's not just your emotions. Grief is a holistic experience. It's every part of your being: physical, emotional, spiritual. And so you have to look at your whole self in the journey that you're in and attend to those needs.
Absolutely.
Robin, can you speak a little bit about complicated grief and when it's time to get help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So complicated grief can come in various ways. Sometimes it's just the fact that you've had lots of loss that has accumulated, and you really haven't had time to process any of them, or maybe didn't feel safe to be able to process those. Sometimes the complicated grief can be disenfranchised, maybe in the type of loss that you had, whether it be a suicide, or maybe it's a different type of loss that's not really recognized within your community. And so being able to know that I'm not grieving well. And so I always encourage people that, just because you're having a hard day, just because you're having a hard week or hard month, does not mean you're not grieving well. Grief hurts. But if you're finding yourself not able to do the next thing, because in grief, there's a very powerful model called the dual process model, which means we really oscillate in and out of our grief. I won't go into detail in that. That's more of a teaching, but it's kind of like a fan that oscillates. So I can attend to my grief over here. I can process it. I can lean into it, but then I should be able to do the next thing. Hard as it may be, I know, just like Heather was saying, I need to focus on my daughter. I need to do these things to move into my new normal. We don't necessarily like that word, but that's a reality that you're moving into. And so if you're finding that you're not able to oscillate, if you're hearing that click, 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 and you're stuck over here in your grief, that's a good indicator. I always say that's just a red flag. Hey, it doesn't mean that you're messed up and you're never going to get through this. No, it just means, pull somebody else into this journey. Maybe it's a support group. Maybe it's a therapist that you will reach out to, or somebody that you trust that's going to give sound advice, and just not necessarily even advice, but just listen to you and provide that support that you need. And I will say too, Heather talked about the blogging, and, I don't know all the resources that maybe you tapped into, Heather, but sometimes just educating yourself in your grief too can be helpful. Learning about the journey of grief, learning what it looks like. And even though it's different for everyone, it's very individual and unique, you can learn that there's a lot of similarities, and that can help uncomplicate where you're at. But certainly if you're feeling stuck, reach out. Delaware Hospice has bereavement counselors all throughout the state. And if we're not able to provide that support, we can certainly link you up with somebody who can. It's so very important to know that you have that support, and it is out there, and know that it's
okay. I mean, I did go to therapy for complicated grief, or complex grief, I think they called it at the time. But I started right off the bat, just considering the situation, considering the fact that I was young. It was a suicide. I was the one that found my husband. I, had a baby. It was complex, there was a lot of facets to it. Grief in and of itself has a lot of facets, especially, when you lose your spouse, it's not just the primary loss, it's losing, for me, the parent to my child, the best friend, the income, there's so much to it, and of course, in my situation, like you said, if it's not something that's as accepted in circles in society and things like that, suicide is not one of those ones where everybody is understanding and accepting and things like that. So when you have something of that capacity, it definitely was helpful to have, that outside ear that could help in that situation and can listen to what I was dealing with each day. I've read a lot of books, I've gone to a lot of seminars, but in grief, it is really important to not isolate yourself. And, one of the best things that anyone ever told me was from that therapist, that I should always have something to look forward to. Mm-hmm. And while that may be a little bit difficult at first, it could be as simple as I was going to go get my favorite cup of coffee that morning. Always have something to look forward to, and ask for help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's no rule book on this. You don't get, a letter doesn't come in the mail and say, okay, this is how you're going to get through this. Right. So absolutely. Seeking help is important. I am very thankful for the fact that I had family nearby to help me out. But I also had to do it myself. I had to do the work myself. I had to raise my daughter myself, but it still takes a village with
right. This. And one thing I will say in that too is, you reached out, Heather, you asked for that help. Not everybody is able to do that. Not everybody feels comfortable in that, or they may have people in their lives that, let's just face it, grief is, it's awkward for people. They don't know how to talk to you. They don't know what to say. Sometimes you feel that they're avoiding you. Maybe you're avoiding them because they're saying things that's not helping you. So
Yes, that happens a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people have good intentions, but they don't always know what to say. Personally, I made it out to be more of a, I'm not going to hide. I'm going to go be in your face and be like, yep, here I am. It is what it is. You know, not everybody can do that. Not everybody has that outgoing where, you know, I'm just going to say it and I'm not going to be embarrassed.
Absolutely. So if you are struggling with that, though, I encourage you, you know, write a grief letter. It doesn't have to be a letter. It could be a text to the people or an email to the people in your support system. And it's just communicating to them, hey, this is where I'm at right now. And this is what I need. Or, you know, sometimes I was just speaking to a lady the other day and she was like, gosh, you know, the holidays are coming and I don't want people around me right now. I just can't do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to communicate to your circle of support what you need. And really what I want to say about that is it gives people permission to be a part of your grief. You wouldn't think that we would need to give permission to people to just have empathy and sympathy, but we do. We need to invite them into our world at whatever level you're okay to accept. And that doesn't mean it stays there. It will change as your grief journey changes. As you go through that, you'll realize you'll need different things at different times. But people are not mind readers. So even in your pain, being able to communicate that at whatever level you do, it's helpful to them. And you'll see that it helps you because you'll get that feedback. You'll understand that people are there for you when you need them and how you need them to support you.
Absolutely.
I remember having trouble accepting that help. And it was uncomfortable for me. And I had a very dear friend come to me and just say, Nicole, just say, yes, please. And thank you. She said, that's all you need to do. Because I find that people really do want to help. And they sometimes, as you said, Robin, it's awkward. They don't know how. But, you know, I remember making a list and saying, could somebody pop over and just take my 3 kids out for ice cream just to give me a minute?
Yeah. And giving them those ideas, because people will say, well, how can I help? Because they don't necessarily know what you need. But if you can give them those short little lists of things that they're like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can run to the store. Or yeah, you know, I can take your child to this event or whatever it is, because people truly do want to help. And the other thing I would say about that, I think it's sort of a little self-talk that I've learned over the years. And I find it really helpful in these situations when you're not so accustomed to needing help or accepting that help. Put it on the other foot. What would you do for somebody else, right? You would be the one that would say, let me do that for you, right? And so when we don't receive that from other people, we really rob them of their blessing. We rob them of their, you know, their intention to really provide that good support, just like you would. And so I think that's important to remember that, you know, if you would do it, the good thing, receive that from somebody else.
I'm going to turn next to some things to think about as you're growing stronger. And these are things that I really didn't think of, but I had some friends that said, okay, we need to work on these things now. And, you know, it's not like you said, Heather, you get a letter in the mail. There isn't really a checklist for this, but just some things, you know, to consider about if you don't have a will, to write one.
I didn't have
my husband. Yeah, I didn't have one. My husband didn't either.
No, my husband didn't have one either.
You know, an advance directive, that was another one.
But now knowing that I was my daughter's only parent, my parents were like, we need to get this done.
Exactly. And there are things you need to think about because it's really a gift to those that if something should happen to you, you know, that people know what it is that you want and they don't have to worry. You know, I put down here about the durable power of attorney. You know, that is important. If there was any property in your name, I remember having to call the bank, you know, to stop the credit card and then to change the checking account. And it was this week, actually, when I had to do that. And I remember the day before Thanksgiving, going to the store to pick up a few items to get diapers and formula, and my credit cards were all declined. And my debit card was declined. And I spent like 2 hours on the phone with the bank only to find out that they marked me as deceased instead of my husband.
My goodness.
I had a
And
similar struggle with health insurance, but that's,
it's, there are so many things that, that
you
go
wouldn't
on.
even
And
think of until it
right,
happens.
right.
Mhm.
And, just some of those things to consider. And then you had talked about, Heather, you found love again.
I did.
And I think that is absolutely incredible. And here, I found these. I was doing a little research for this presentation, and thought I would share. And if either one of you want to comment, about going slowly. When you're ready, you're ready. There's no timeline for that. And it's okay for you to want to be happy and to take that first move.
I think
And
the number one thing there is that you, and there's
right.
no appropriate timeline that's set for everyone. I remember prior to this happening to me, someone else we knew that had lost a spouse, people commenting like, well, it's too soon, or why isn't she dating yet, or what? And everybody on the outside is judging it. And what it comes down to is, again, there's no rule book on this. There's no set time that you're supposed to be ready. And I will say to make sure that you are, because, in the beginning, right off the bat, I was like, okay, I'm never dating again. But I was 28 years old. Like, that's not logical.
Right.
But at the same time, the person at the funeral saying to me, you're young, you'll get married again, that felt awful.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think what it comes down to is knowing yourself, being true to yourself. And yes, I was 100%, I will admit, I was on dating sites way too early because I had no intention of actually dating. This was me able to put my toe in the water and retreat. And that's okay. That's what was working for me in the moment, to just kind of feel a little bit of like what the world has to offer. I did have a failed relationship before the one that I'm in now, and that's okay. It wasn't meant to be. It was a learning experience. I, got out there. But I am lucky that I have been with someone, I've been with him for 5.5 years now. He's wonderful. He's respectful. He comes to the graveyard with us. It's out there if you want it. And if you don't, that's okay. It is perfectly acceptable to say, I don't want to get out there.
I think you is going to become my new favorite phrase. I love that.
I mean, and I've had this conversation even with close family members. People have struggled with me moving on. And the only thing that I can say is you can't understand what I'm feeling inside. You can't understand that I can still cherish and, it doesn't negate my marriage because I'm in love again.
Right.
It means that there's room for both.
Yeah, your heart doesn't have like it's not like a pie where, you have like a third and a third and a third. It just keeps growing.
It keeps growing. And I think a big thing that people struggle with, and I did in the beginning, was feeling guilty about it. But what it comes down to is I'm still on earth and I still need to live my life and I still need to love my life. I chose not to die with him. And that's okay. You're allowed to be happy again.
Yeah. And that's a tough one. And that was actually my last bullet point here about, I think our loved ones would want to see us smile. They would want to see us happy. And that's okay, because you never do forget.
And so can I chime in on the guilty just real quick?
Yes, please.
Can't be like a whole teaching, but just really like a short little thought on this is, we say don't feel guilty, but most of us will feel that, in grief at some point. And if I can just give a little bit of a reframe on guilty,
Sure.
we think of, when you say somebody's guilty, it implies that you committed a crime, really, right? If you think about that, if somebody's guilty, they're guilty of a crime. And in grief, you're not guilty of a crime. You may have regrets. You may have regrets that it didn't, go this way, or you have regrets that, how can I be moving forward in this without my loved one? But being able to reframe that that you're not guilty, lean into that feeling, but also realize that it's more of regret. You didn't do anything wrong. And the other piece of that is, at some point when you're ready, that's different for each person in their journey, to be able to challenge that regret, to begin to speak back to it and say, well, and sometimes this is a great place where you write that letter to your loved one, putting those regrets in there. But then at the end of that, being able to release yourself and let that go, right? It's really a significant point in being able to move forward in your grief and getting to that place where you realize that, like Heather said, I'm still here and I have a future ahead of me. It doesn't mean that I've left my loved one behind, because they're always in your heart. And so when you do that really important grief work that Heather's been talking about, it takes you showing up to that. When you do that, when you process all those really tough and big emotions, when you do that, it creates that space in your heart, not for pain, but for love and memories. Those never go away. That'll always be a part of your heart and with you. It's a legacy, right? And so I think David Kessler's an author, a grief counselor. And one of my favorite things that he says, because I think it can be that catalyst to help you jump over that hurdle sometimes of regret, is to remember to love with more, to learn to remember them with more love than pain. And so I'm going to say that again. Learn to remember them with more love than pain. And that's really our goal in the healing grief journey, learning to remember them, but to release the pain, because the pain isn't what's going to keep you connected to them. That'll just keep you connected to pain. It's holding on to the love and memories that helps you
and when you get to a point where you can smile and laugh and be excited to hear stories of them instead of it hurting. I've made the choice to let that go, to forgive in my situation, to forgive him, to forgive myself for what I didn't know. That's a huge thing when you can let that go and let the pain go and remember the joy.
Right.
So well said. Thank you both so very much.
I'm sorry. I know time to get to that point a lot, especially if there's some complicated issues in the grief itself or in the relationship, but recognizing that's okay. There's no time limit here, right? Your time is your time in your grief journey. So don't compare it to anyone else's, and be okay with where you're at. One of the biggest things I think can be helpful is to realize, just lean into it. Lean into what you're feeling and realize that wherever you're at is okay for you, because it's your journey. It's nobody else's, right? Although other people are grieving with you if they lost the same person, only you can feel what you feel. No one can climb inside of you and know exactly what you're going through.
And when the feelings come, acknowledge them.
Yes.
Do what you need to do and then let them go.
Yeah, it's a great analogy right here. We live in Delaware, close to the beach. So I always use the analogy of grief as like waves of the ocean, and they literally are. They can come in like big tsunamis and knock you over. Sometimes they're just really rough and rapid. Sometimes it might be a placid day or a placid moment. That's okay. But at any beach you go to, they always have those riptide signs, right? And the instruction is to swim with it, right? To swim with it. If you try to fight it, it'll take you down. And I think that's so true in grief. If we try to fight those feelings, if we try to wrestle against them, deny them, distract them, ignore them, it can drown you in your grief. But if you lean into it, if you swim with it, eventually you come into a clearing, into a soft space. It may not last for long, and that's okay. Enjoy those moments when they're there, but realize that you're doing that really tough work of leaning into it.
And my motto has always been, just keep swimming.
Yep. From
Just
Nemo,
keep
just
swimming.
keep swimming.
I have that actually on my arm. Just keep swimming to remind me every day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Somebody got me the Nemo fish, and it's with that in the card, and it's at my desk at work. Just keep swimming. Ladies, I would
Sometimes
like
you may just
to.
be treading water. That's okay,
Okay.
right?
Treading.
Maybe you're just treading water.
Yep.
You're not making it ground, but you're not going down either.
Keeping
And
your head up.
That's a good
Yep.
day.
This has been absolutely phenomenal, and I thank you both. Um, for you, Heather, for sharing your story and your message and what you're doing going forward. It's truly remarkable how you turned something like this into to see where you are today. And Robin, thank you. We have an amazing bereavement team at Delaware Hospice, and you don't necessarily have to have a loved one on hospice. As a nonprofit, we're here for the community, and I think that's something that's very important. My husband was never on hospice, but I've used, before starting here, so many of the services of the counselors, and even for my children as well. In closing, I just wanted to let everyone know that today we do have kicking off the Take Out the Stigma of Grief sessions, and there's a number more coming up over the next few days if you're interested. In about an hour, we're going to talk about the grief associated with a job loss, particularly during COVID, miscarriage, which is incredibly lonely and not spoken about. Grieving as a suicide loss survivor. The people that are on this panel lost loved ones to addiction, and it's going to be very raw and emotional. This evening, we're doing a little paint party, healing through art and how art can be used to help people through grief. Tomorrow morning, the loss associated with Alzheimer's, how you grieve for that person you once knew and that's not there anymore. Mentally, but they're physically there and you're taking care of. We'll also be talking about helping children cope. When you lose a pet, that's incredibly difficult for families. Then tomorrow afternoon, we'll be talking about a sudden loss and the loss of a child. And then we're wrapping up on, where's my mouse? It just did not want to work there for a second. On Wednesday, we'll talk a little bit about anticipatory grief. So when you have someone that may be on hospice, the days are limited, but you're making the most of them. So we'll talk about that. Things that you wish you knew before your loved one died, some ways to remember them. And this one, happily ever after divorce. That's a sort of grief as well. And then on Thanksgiving, we'll just have a Thanksgiving blessing, something just very short, but we wanted to acknowledge the day of Thanksgiving, of giving thanks. But there are many people, many seats around the table that are empty. So just something that, can bring people together for that blessing. And I just have a few more things. I'll just, as part of Take Out the Stigma of Grief, there are a number of restaurants throughout the state that are having specials. I'll call out Frank's Liquors, for example. They have this wonderful wine advent calendar, and they're making donations to Delaware Hospice the 21st to the 28th for this. So there's some wonderful restaurants if you're ordering takeout this week, just to keep in mind. And this is one that just has started. The Delaware Hospice Festival of Trees. It's a wonderful event. This year, of course, being virtual, so it is a little different. Over the weekend, they did a festival at home video where you could learn more about it and see the trees. And one of the nice things is that you can order a remembrance ornament in honor of your loved one. This is one of the 3 that are available this year. And then just in closing, we're here for you at Delaware Hospice as your community hospice. We do so much more than just hospice. There's bereavement programs, palliative programs. There's the New Hope program for children, many, many things where we can help you and your loved ones. And then I'd just like to give a special thanks to Wing Mom, which is a wonderful company in Newcastle County. They actually came up with this idea about Take Out the Stigma of Grief. We've been partnering them for a few months now, and they're incredible. I love their motto, building a village of moms, helping families and seniors. Wonderful group of women that own the company. And then also thanks to Ignite Your Light Insurance Catering. So again, ladies, I want to thank you very, very much. I'll just stop the share here. It's been a wonderful morning. I am so glad to have been able to spend this time with you. Thank you so very much, and stay safe. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You all as well.
Thank you so much.